Well, hello everybody, and welcome to what I hope will be a slightly interesting video. We have as the backdrop today my Ferrari 430 Scuderia. I've pulled up on the side of the road, having just finished driving it and filming another vlog. But for this one, I thought I'd do something a little bit different, be stationary, less noise, less bluster, and this is probably going to be a slightly briefer video as well. As I'm sure you've seen, topic of today's video, Ferraris. Why do they keep catching fire? Before we get on too far though, what I'm going to do is wind the window down just a little bit in this car because it's actually rather warm today. I know it looks a little bit grim out there. I've picked a beautiful piece of Oxfordshire. 430s, they love to go beep at you for many reasons really. Sometimes apparently no reason at all. That's the one I think when you put it in neutral and you take the key out and it just does that. Anyway, yes, Ferraris. Why do they catch fire? And this is an interesting topic because, first off, I don't really think it's a very uniquely Ferrari problem. But Tesla owners and fans, I'm sure, understand what this feels like because any time a Tesla catches fire now, it makes what seems like front page news, or at least front page news in the social media world. You know, if someone crashes a Tesla and it goes bang and there's a fireworks show afterwards, you know, it will be on Facebook, it will be on Instagram, it will be absolutely everywhere because it's the talking point of the moment and one for a separate video, although I'll mention it a little bit later on. Ferraris, similarly. If a Ferrari catches fire and somebody is there to film it, as they often will be, because if they're there in the modern age, they've probably got a phone, which means they've got a camera or a video camera, and they'll plaster said picture all over the place. It's happened to people that I know, like my friend Scott Ratterosso, who somehow seems to get a mention in every single one of my videos. It can also happen with other cars too. So another YouTuber I know, Ben Rain, recently had this happen to his Audi R8. And the R8 is not a car I think you'd associate with catching on fire. There are other vehicles that have fairly famously caught ablaze, and for some reason it just didn't really stick with the public imagination. Porsche have had it with a few different cars. The 991 GT3 in particular was well known for it. The Ferrari 458 I think was probably the car in most recent times that actually caught fire while still fairly new. That was traced down to a problem with the glue in the wheel arch, of all things, because the 458 was a brand new thing at the time. Everybody talked about it. Every single time one of them caught fire, a huge deal was made of it. But the actual fact was it was a fairly small number of cars. Not excusing it, it's still obviously a problem, but it did get sorted. If there's something like that happens, then a manufacturer is on a bound to issue a recall. Most frustratingly, it actually does take something really quite serious for a manufacturer to actually be able to do that. Sometimes they'd actually really want you to bring your car in so they could fix certain things, but if it's not actually serious enough, if there isn't what would be considered, I suppose, a danger to life, or an imminent danger to life, or a real design defect, there's not really much they can do because they just can't go to the government and say, tell us everyone that has a Ferrari 355 or 360 or 550 or whatever. There needs to be a risk of what Ferrari call a thermal incident or something similar. You know, or we've realised that actually after 10,000 miles, the wheels are going to just come off. Something like that. It has to be fairly serious in order for a recall to even be considered. So you don't see them all that often. Now, I have actually taken a Ferrari in for recall once, not one of those that I owned. I've only ever had the two, this and my 550. The 355 actually had a recall very late into its life. So it was about nearly 20-year-old car. I think it's 2013 or so when a recall was issued for the 355 related to potential cause of fire. And this is interesting because by that point in time, the oldest 355 in the whole world was well over a decade. So you would have thought that if there was some fatal design flaw, that it would have been found much, much earlier and dealt with. And you'd be right. I do believe with this specific recall, it's one of these things where it's not actually really Ferrari's fault, but they kind of had to deal with it anyway because of the possibility of what could happen. And it was very simply a fuel line was essentially rupturing, splitting, getting cut. Something was happening to the fuel line, fuel spilling out, fire ensuing. The cause of this, apparently, is many people who were doing the cam belt change on those cars wrong. You see, officially, to do a cam belt change on a 355, you drop the engine. The sort of rear subframe kind of comes out, and you do the cam belt change outside the car. In a 360, there's actually a little cutout back here where you can do it, and on these, it's a timing chain, so you don't need to worry about it at all. But the 355, that's how you're meant to do it. And this means cam belt changes are quite expensive. It's one of these famous Ferrari fables, if you will. I've seen people say it's sort of like $10,000 or something like that to do a cam belt change, including people that should know a lot better and should know it's not that expensive. The actual cost of doing a 355 cam belt is about £2,500 to £3,000 here, and that's at a Ferrari main dealer, or a bit less if you go for an independent. I like my main dealer, Meridian Modena, give them a big shout out, they're lovely people. £2,700, including VAT, the last time that I asked, so don't quote me on that, to get your 355 cam belt done the proper way. But the improper way is to be a little bit cheeky and drop instead the fuel tank, which sits ahead of the engine, and then basically sort of, get your hands up and do the whole thing blind. In theory, you can do it that way, and I've seen some people try and argue that that's actually a better way to do it. They say, taking the engine in and out of the car all that time puts stress on certain things, and it's not really, good for the car, but I'm not sure I subscribe to that. Ferrari built it knowing that that was going to be done, and I think it's a really good opportunity to get a clear look at the engine itself, the engine bay, give the car a check over. These are not cheap cars. I think it's worth spending an extra £1,000 every 3 years just doing things properly. But if you want to save some money and do it improperly, you can. I'm sure there are plenty of places out there who can do it risk-free, but that wasn't all of them. And some of them were essentially tugging on some of the fuel lines when they were moving the fuel tank, and this is what caused the issue. So Ferrari had to fix the car despite the fact that the problem wasn't actually caused by them. Now, of course, there are other cars out there which do seem to simply spontaneously combust. They just caught fire for no apparent reason whatsoever. And the truth is, I think almost never is it actually down to a poor design or a poor choice or something being specifically badly done by Ferrari. And to be honest here, you could also say the same about Lamborghini, Porsche, lots of other manufacturers. In many cases, we're talking about old cars here, and the simple fact is there are probably more old Ferraris currently on the road and in use than there are many other brands, because people like them enough that they kept them, they kept spending money on them, and they survived. You don't really tend to see people driving, 40, 50-year-old Fords either, and if they were still driving those, guess what? They're also a bit of a fire hazard. Old cars, when you've got carburetors, you've got fuel spraying everywhere, they do seem to just like catching fire quite a bit more than the modern equivalent. But there are lots of reasons why a car can catch fire. In short, generally, it's fuel getting somewhere it's not meant to, and finding either a spark or simply just something very, very hot like an exhaust. And with a car like this, if any fuel gets anywhere in the engine bay, that's about it. Other cars, maybe you get away with it because, you could get in there and you could turn it on and there could be fuel spraying everywhere out of the fuel tank. But if the fuel tank's back there and the engine's up there, it's not too bad. With a Ferrari, they're kind of sat next to each other, so you got to watch out for that sort of stuff. I've also seen other cars of different brands where one particular car, a Nissan actually, a very nice Nissan, very extremely well-maintained Nissan, we went to go and start and turn it on and something just came loose, something just sort of popped out, and it was just pouring fuel at quite a rate of knots onto the floor. Luckily, we didn't start the car, but, had that car been started, there was the possibility, if something sparked or arced or whatever, that car would have gone up in flames. A priceless, valuable piece of Japanese JayEmm history gone forever. And nobody really wants that. There's not enough of these cars around for us to be able to sort of spare them by just, setting light to them. Of course, fuel isn't the only way that a fire could start. The other possibility, really, the sort of big number two, is going to be electrical. This is particularly true of older cars that are in storage, where you get rodents nibbling at things. You also get random stuff like Mercedes for a long time had a wiring loom that was made from biodegradable plastic, or the sheathing of it was biodegradable. So over time, it simply just exposes all of the wiring. This can just happen. You also get with different cars, maybe they're expensive now, but they weren't always. So over time, they were maintained in perhaps not the best fashion. So bodges were done, things weren't done quite right. And the simple ravages of time can also cause a lot of issues. And the simple fact is this: when it comes to maintaining older cars, even expensive older cars, owners can be a little bit funny. I've got personal experience of this. Ferrari owners will happily spend much money on fixing sticky switches and things like that. By the way, I'm not singling out see-through glass. I know you've just spent a lot of money fixing sticky switches. I intend to do much the same with the 550 and also in here with a couple of bits of sticky stuff that it has. However, very few of them are actually willing, as a routine thing, to go and look at brake lines, fuel lines, stuff like that. Unless you've got a real decent trusted place looking very closely at your car, it's easy to miss these things. And more often than not, when it comes to lines rupturing, that sort of stuff, you may simply not know until it's far too late. A fuel line could look perfectly okay, but actually it could be moments away from failure. So what can you actually do to stop this from happening? There's a few things. First off, and the most basic, most simple thing, if you have an older car, particularly one, say, that's MOT exempt, if it's been in storage for a little while, you're going to go and use it, or it's been a long time since someone has looked at it. Cars that do few miles, they often don't get serviced so often. Just take it to your local trusted mechanic. They don't necessarily need to be a specialist. Take it to your friendly MOT tester. Say to them, look, even if it's an MOT exempt car, say, look, could you just, for me, put it through the equivalent of an MOT, just give it a real careful look over, check all my lines and things are okay, check we're not leaking any fluids, check that my car is safe. They'll happily do that. It's probably going to cost you 50 to 100 quid at most. And that's just a real decent, basic, peace of mind thing that you can do with any car. The next thing is certain manufacturers do actually have schemes now for their older cars. So Ferrari have one, I've done videos on it, it's called the Premium Program, and it can take place either in one big hit or over sort of a period of time. I know a lot of people that watch the channel have actually done it with their cars. Last time I checked, it was 360, 430, 550, 575, I think 599, 612, 456. Those are the kind of cars that are eligible. This would be eligible as well. And that'll go through the car. So the 550's had it. So all the fuel lines on the 550 are new. We've got power steering lines on there. They've also replaced some gaiters on the steering rack. They did some manifold gaskets. They've done all sorts of stuff. So that video detailed all the things we actually did with that car, and really is aimed at replacing all those bits people just don't really replace, but still will need replacing over time. This isn't because Ferrari used bad parts. It's just, that's what happens, especially with newer fuel coming in. We've got E10 now, and at the moment, super unleaded here in the UK isn't E10, it's still E5, or SO Supreme, I think, is zero ethanol. But it's likely in the near future that E10 may come into super as well. It's a very aggressive thing, and a lot of older cars simply aren't equipped to deal with it, in the same way that, we switched from leaded to unleaded fuel, and a lot of cars just weren't built to cope with the demands of the newer fuel. So, speak to your manufacturer, ask them, is there anything I need to do? If you've got an older car and for whatever reason you do have to run it on E10, or you might run it on E10, you go into Europe or something, just speak to them and they'll say, yeah, you know what, you need to do this, this and this, and then you'll be okay. There'll be things, there'll be a way around it. You don't just have to chuck your car in the bin. In truth, this video actually started with a very, very simple train of thought. I was going along one day, artist's impression, that's how I drive everywhere all the time. And I looked down there and I saw my fire extinguisher. Now, it's a lovely, beautiful fire extinguisher in a grey Alcantara casing, which has been matched to the rest of the interior, and it's got the same contrast grey stitching and everything. And I sat there and I looked at it and I thought, first off, it's better than my friend's McLaren 600 LT, because in that car, the fire extinguisher was actually in the boot at the front. So that's not really much good, because if you need a fire extinguisher, it's probably an emergency scenario and not be much use to you up there. But I looked at this one and I thought two things. I thought, first off, I don't know how easy that is to actually access, because it's all kind of, nicely sort of tucked in there. It looks, I don't really want to disturb it, to be honest with you. The other thing is, that's almost certainly the original fire extinguisher for this car, which means that it's at least 13 years old. And these do have a limited shelf life. I've spoken to people that know what they're talking about with these things, and they said, yeah, maybe it would last 10 years if it was in an office on a wall, but in a car where it's been shaken about, the powder inside it will be compressed down, and it's probably not going to be much good to anybody. So I started thinking, well, okay, I wanted to do this video talking about cars catching fire and stuff like that, because I think it's an interesting topic. However, there is only so much prevention that one can ever do, really. I suppose it would be really, really good to talk to a company that can maybe advise me on what you do if you've got to that point where your car has caught fire. So I was actually dealing with a company in America called Carbonio, who makes slightly bigger shift paddles for this, because I don't like the small shift paddles. I want some slightly bigger ones. I got in touch with them, and actually they watched the channel, so I was going to pay for them, but they just sent me some, so I'll be fitting those soon, which I'm really looking forward to, because these are a bit piddly. So I also saw that they have a product that they call the Element, and it's sort of very small, compact fire extinguisher, essentially. So I spoke to them, I said, you know, I'm doing this little video about fires in cars and things. Talk to me about this element thing. And they said, well, tell you what, we'll send you to the UK distributor of the same product, who are called Fire Safety Stick. So I went and had a bit of a meeting with them, which turned out to be very interesting. So they actually gave me one of their little sticks, and we went down and had a little demonstration. You see, there are lots and lots of problems with something like that. It's very big, it's very bulky. It probably doesn't work anymore. When it did work, they don't actually last very long. Those tiny little extinguishers like that, they've got a few seconds of extinguishing ability in them, which if you're in a panic, if you're in a hurry, if you're an untrained firefighting person like me, then it's probably not going to actually put your fire out. It burns like a flare. So as you can see, it's tiny. It does look like a flare as well. If you have a Japanese car, please don't confuse the two. And the way you light it is you take this top off, and you'll see there a little black piece, and you take the bottom off, and you see a little red striker, and you basically do that and strike it like a match. That begins a chemical reaction, and it burns, again, a lot really like a flare. Inside, there's a bit of a resin in here. This is a metal tube. It's actually quite environmentally friendly overall. It's pretty much all recyclable. This one will burn for 50 seconds. They used to do a 25-second one, and they also do a 100-second one, which is slightly larger. What this does is force all of the oxygen out of the area. The people behind this are actually real, genuine fire safety professionals. They're not some random people reselling stuff off Alibaba. This is a decent product made in Italy to rigorous, decent standards. And the people behind Fire Safety Stick, the UK distributor, so again, Element in the USA, they were proper, serious advisors for, you know, fire safety in big domestic installations and commercial and stuff like that. So they have real proper qualifications. I wanted to go and meet with them before I even said anything to you about this. And there are several benefits of this over a regular fire extinguisher. First off, you don't have to work out whether you're getting the right one, because this will put almost all types of fire out. And of perhaps more interest to a lot of people, this is quite safe. I could set this off in here now. I'm not going to, but I could set this off in here now, and I could keep talking to you. I would be relatively safe. The car would smell a bit funny for a few days, but it would be otherwise absolutely fine. I did, as you can probably see, the demo with them where they light this, put the fire out, then they stick this in a bucket of water, then they light a fire again, and they put it out again. And that's with the 25-second stick. This is quite handy. It doesn't wreck your car. That's a big thing for a lot of people, because a power extinguisher can do as much damage to a car as the fire could. It's very easy to use because you kind of just point it in the general direction of the fire. And because it lasts a long time, it means if you're in a panic, which you probably are if your car's on fire or your house or whatever, you've got time to do things right. And you kind of just point it in the general direction of the fire, and the fire actually kind of puts itself out. It's very clever, very trick. This comes with a basic little mount. We're actually working on a few more, so for car-specific stuff. So you can screw this into whatever you want, or you could stick it on. And I'm also getting one made up, which will be curved and fit to my roll cage. So this will just be sat here on the roll cage, taking up no space for my interior, but exactly where I need it, if I ever need it, which I hope, obviously, to not. But I might be driving past someone else and they're on fire, and I can, you know, put them out with my stick. And they're 72 quid, by the way. I'll put a link down below of loads of places you can get one. This is not a paid promotion. The key thing as well to say, and something they wanted to stress and I want to stress, is that this is not for saving your car. This is for saving you and the people in the car. If you happen to be able to save your car before the fire brigade get to it and basically flood it, great, lovely, fantastic, everyone's happy, everyone's a winner, that's a Brucey bonus. But the key point of this is to get you out of the car. That's why it's nice to have it small enough that it's where you need it, not stuffed in your boot underneath all of your stuff. I also think there's going to be a real market for these going forwards, because as we mentioned earlier, a lot of people keep talking about electric cars catching fire. The problem with electric cars catching fire is they seem to be very, very difficult to put out. Now, if I did have an electric car, I would definitely want one of the 100-second ones of these. I think it's about 100 quid or so for one of those. And for your money, you get 100 seconds to get out of your car. This is essentially, in this one, 50 seconds worth of firefighting ability. And in an electric car, you're not going to be able to put the fire out. If the fire brigade can't put the fire out, then you've not really got any chance. But you might be able to keep it at bay for a little while you retrieve all the people, the dog, and everything else that you've been carting around. And so that, I think, is a very interesting thing to have. They gave me a couple of these. That's all I've had from them in terms of, you know, promotional, whatever. I asked them for a couple of the products because I really like them, and I'm going to be buying a load more. I'm going to be sticking them in all of my cars because I like all of my cars. I'll also be sticking one in the garage and one next to the oven as well, and maybe even next to the bed, because it just seems like for the price and for the convenience of it, you know, it's not taking up loads and loads of room or anything. It's just, it's just a kind of good thing to have. So even if you do have an older car and you have done all the correct stuff, you've had all the lines and things, you know, changed and sorted or checked or whatever, there's always that random element. There's always something can happen. And so from my perspective, it is a bit of a no-brainer to have something like this to hand. It's a cool little piece of kit. So yeah, there we go. Why don't you share your stories of having your car on fire in the comment section down below. Thanks for joining me for yet another video. Hope you found it interesting. Sorry the shirt was a little bit plain. Didn't actually plan on doing any filming at all today. And I hope you've spotted some maybe nice and interesting cars driving by as I've been here. Anyway, thanks again. I'll see you for the next one. Bye-bye.